News out of Kansas City is unfortunately not good, Mike. Um, Word just came out. Actually, I'm going to let you break the story, but pretty tragic stuff out there. What's going on?
What's going on, Nick? Good to be back on the program. Yeah, it's a very sad day today in Kansas City as Chiefs linebacker and played a lot on special teams this year. Javon Belcher, former draft pick out of University of Maine, committed suicide in front of the Chiefs complex earlier today. Details are very sketchy right now as to what's happening over there in Arrowhead, but at about 10 a.m., the Arrowhead practice facility sent out a phone call to the Kansas City police in regards to a black male suspect armed with a gun in the parking lot. He matched the description of a shooting suspect earlier in the morning where I guess Belcher, the details right now is that Belcher had shot earlier and killed a young woman at a nearby residence about a couple miles away from the Kansas City Chiefs practice facility. And then he drove over to Arrowhead himself, was talking to some Chiefs employees with a gun to his head. From what the details, again, are still sketchy, but from what Romeo Cornell and some of the Kansas City personnel that were on site, Scott Pioli was the general manager. They said he was talking to them. He thanked them for his opportunity. And then police heard a gunshot later on. And right now, the Chiefs have released a statement saying we can confirm that there was an incident at Arrowhead earlier this morning. We are cooperating with authorities in their investigation. But this is very, it's very tragic, the whole scenario. And you don't know what goes on in the mind of a player right now. It's too early to speculate as to whether or not some type of injury, depression, anything like that could have factored in, and you won't know that until the autopsy results are released later on. But very sad day, and especially with the season the Chiefs are already having it as the worst record in the National Football League. This doesn't make it any easier over there in Kansas City. So our thoughts and prayers around the league go out to them.
The story. I know the one part I read from the ESPN.com story. I read it actually just a little while ago, so at the time the name of the player hadn't been released. There was story. The story does lead us to think that, or not even leads us to think, it says outright that Coach Cornell and GM Scott Pioli were actually in front of in front of the shooter when it happened. Mike, it begs the question: does the Panthers are on their way for the game tomorrow, but is there any room for discussion about whether this game gets canceled?
And as always, commissioners always have in their collective bargaining agreements to postpone games. Obviously, we all saw what happened with 9/11 with the cancellation of games. More so that this happened at the Chiefs practice facility. I'm not sure where Commissioner Goodell could step in and say the game, needs to not be played. Also, all bye weeks right now in the National Football League are used up. So there isn't a situation where, this could be moved to a Thursday situation and maybe, play the game on a Thursday night. It's very tough scheduling in the National Football League, and especially a game like this that really is not going to impact the standings, because the Panthers and Chiefs, while they're not, the Chiefs have been mathematically eliminated, but the Panthers are technically still in the hunt for a wild card spot, but that's more than likely not going to be the case. You could see Goodell intervene and maybe say, let's push the game. I've never seen an instance so far in the years, watching and covering the National Football League about a game being postponed because of a shooting, of this magnitude. Especially, it didn't involve anybody else. It was self-inflicted. I think the most recent situation you could look back to was the Chris Henry situation. And that, of course, that didn't occur on the grounds of an NFL facility. So there's no real sticking point where the commissioner can point to or past history where he can interject and maybe cancel this game. From what the details are in numerous articles being reported on AP and Sports Illustrated, the Panthers are already en route to Kansas City. So it's more than likely the game will take place tomorrow.
It is tragic news. The question that comes out of me simply because of the fact that it took place at the facility. We're talking about a head coach and team officials that have just essentially witnessed a murder. And for a coach and staff to proceed with the game on Sunday, I understand why, but it just in my own opinion, it's something that that I would review. And I think back to the Andy Reid situation, unfortunately, in August, where one of his sons had also committed suicide, and Coach Reid had proceeded further with his coaching and the rest of the season. ScoreCenter is now just releasing the name. This is coming courtesy of the SportsCenter app for iOS. Police identify Javon Belcher, 25, as the Chiefs player. Mike, of course, has already given that name, but that is now, of course, officially coming from ESPN. Mike, I guess going from here, we're still, of course, talking NFL talk. Switching teams to the team, of course, that we cover, the Oakland Raiders. Two big stories that came out of this week. First, of course, is the suspension, at least currently, the suspension of middle linebacker Orlando McClain for the next 2 games, which of course will include, which will begin with this Sunday's game hosting against Cleveland. Mike, the story seems to have taken a couple of different places. We began with McClain tweeting by Wednesday that he was cut or he was released. The Raiders firing back Thursday, saying that that was not the case, and now we are coming to where it's a suspension. Mike, from what you heard Tuesday and Wednesday, as far as the incident at practice to where we are now with the suspension, what's been the flow of the story? Is it just a case of miscommunication or carefully selected communication between the Raiders and the press? Or is it just where social media sort of jumped the gun and McClain said something that basically wasn't true in terms of his status with the team?
Well, I mean, you're getting conflicting stories and reports out of everywhere. Like you just said, McClain made official on his Facebook page and thanking the fans and saying, he enjoyed his time in Oakland. Now, you think back to last year where McClain had I think it was earlier this year, where he had the incident in Alabama where he was suspected of pulling out a gun on an unarmed citizen, pointing it in the direction of the person. Alabama police was arrested, and obviously everybody knows McClain was a first-round draft pick from the University of Alabama, and from the local area. And so he also had some off-the-field incidents in college, and obviously the Raiders were willing to overlook that, and a lot of teams were willing to overlook that to pick McClain that high in the draft. The Giants were very high on selecting him. But after McClain posted on his Facebook, obviously, in the Twitter and Facebook day and age that we're in, a lot of athletes, they don't think when they get sent. He had it removed. And so sources reporting into ESPN and to Chris Mortensen had reported that, McClain would in fact get cut. Then you follow that with the next day where the Raiders had said they're going to suspend him for the next 2 games. So it's a very conflicting story. A lot of people in the San Francisco Bay Area, I've just been talking with some journalists out there and reading some of the articles out there, they all seem to think that McClain is gone. GM Reggie McKenzie is backing first-year coach Dennis Allen and trying to create a culture change there where a lot of the knocks on Hugh Jackson's regime was that the inmates ran the asylum and that he didn't have a lot of player control in terms of the locker room in those final couple of games with the Detroit game and the San Diego game, those 2 losses that pretty much took the Raiders out of playoff contention. And so McKenzie was brought in, by Mark Davis as kind of like a disciplinarian, and that's why they hired Dennis Allen, because of the reputation that he had in Denver of being very discipline-oriented, and they wanted to kind of clean house. And unfortunately, McClain, while he is talented, this year has not really gotten the 3-4 scheme that the Raiders are employing, and it's unfortunate because McClain is extremely talented, and this is going to be another hurt to the Raiders defensively from a bunch of starters that were on the team last year, Thomas Howard, Cameron Wimbley, and this is going to be another line of talented player who just didn't pan out for the Raiders.
Mike, let's just stop there for a quick second. Folks, we're going to take a break. This is long before I've gotten a chance to say it, but of course you are listening to the Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon, courtesy from youtube.com/NPZ1978. We're going to be right back. Hi, everyone. This is Nick Zaveri of the Nick Zaveri Podcast with Mike Leon, here to talk about Brookstone. Brookstone's Big Blue Live wireless Bluetooth speakers are how we get to hear Mike Leon each week sound so good on the show. Only $99. Brookstone stores have the best in electronics and the best accessories for your iPhone, iPod, and iPad. Basically, if you have something that begins with an I, Brookstone's got you covered. They also have great home appliances, like aerators which make red wine taste that much better, and massage chairs for your office. With something for your kitchen, your office, or the outdoors, Brookstone is always worth the trip to the mall, even during the craziness of the holidays. Check out brookstone.com and find a location near you using their store locator. Brookstone. It's the store where the guys can be found. As we're now talking about Raiders and specifically Rolando McClain, let's continue, or rather, let's kind of go back a step and pick it up with the game on Sunday. Thanks again, of course, listening to the Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon on the podcast. Mike, I last time we were on, it was the Thanksgiving show, of course, and I decided to wildly predict that the Raiders were going to indeed win this game. Tell me where the prediction goes wrong. What happened on Sunday?
I'll tell you where the prediction goes wrong. It's probably in the first quarter when Zaveri screen Ellis picked about a 45-yard run down the sideline. Mohamed Sanu makes an incredible one-handed catch in the red zone. It's very tough to overcome some of the offensive deficiencies that the Raiders are plagued with right now. Mainly for the second straight week, Mike Goodson, Dan McFadden did not play in the game. You had Richard Seymour again not dressing for the game. Very tough to overcome some of these injuries, and of course, obviously you don't want to make excuses about the injuries, but Cincinnati right now is a team on a roll. They've won 3 in a row. They're 6-5 right now. Right now, wild card hunt, especially with the loss that Pittsburgh suffered this past Sunday against the Browns. It puts the Bengals right there in the wild card hunt. So they're a very hot team right now. Andy Dalton is starting to figure it out. He threw 3 touchdowns on Sunday. Ben Jarvis with the running game is really rolling right now, and a very good offseason pickup he's proven out to be that they got from New England. The Raiders, again, there's a bunch of different things you can highlight in this game. The pass defense was poor. Carson was under pressure. I mean, he was sacked twice just on the opening drive. So the O-line has not been very good like they were last year under Hugh Jackson, creating holes in the running game and also protecting Carson in the passing game. But there's a lot to point to from Sunday.
So, another interesting fact, of course, is the Raiders once again going for on fourth down. Oakland is actually tied for 8th in the league in number of attempts. They have attempted 11 plays on fourth down, are 3 for 11. Mike, does it speak to the desperation of this team that it's getting to the point where either at midway through the field or on just some select drives, Coach Allen's just trying for anything to keep that offense on the field?
Well, I think last year you saw more of Sebastian Janikowski utilized, especially down and distance of where these fourth downs are occurring is very key. Every fourth down situation has its own little story. It could be 4th and 1. It could be at, over midfield. And, everybody knows how good Leckler is as a punter. He's a 4-time Pro Bowler. So, you can pin them deep, but maybe you go for it and trust your defense. So you have to look at where these fourth down situations occur. That's the first thing. I think last year the Raiders were a little bit better, and I don't have the numbers in front of me in terms of fourth down conversions, only from the standpoint that they trusted the run game a little bit more with Michael Bush to be able to get that first down. The O-line was playing a little bit better last year in terms of getting a good push. You had Kevin Boss and Brandon Myers at the tight end position that could stretch it in a play action situation on fourth down. So I think the Raiders had a little bit more options last year in terms of going for it on fourth down. Now, does it speak to desperation? Well, I mean, everyone's going to point to, hey, listen, you're 3-8. Why wouldn't you go for it on fourth down a little bit more often? But I always think in the course of a game, if you're trying to win a game, you have to really get a read on your team. And right now, I think Dennis Allen is reading that the defense has some deficiencies, and it still depends on the situation in terms of yardage or where you are, whether you're at midfield or cross midfield or on the other side of the field, on the opponent's side. And I think Dennis Allen right now is taking a temperature and saying, we have Marcel Reese, let's get a push and let's try to get these fourth-down conversions and keep the offense on the field to keep the defense away from shooting themselves in the foot, because the defense has really been the most disappointing part of the team. We've talked about it numerous times on this podcast, but just in terms of the cuts that they made in the offseason, now as we're talking about it, the McClain situation that's happening, and I already said earlier that he's not been getting the defenses the way Coach Allen and his staff had hoped he would. and that's really big. Philip Wheeler, who they brought over from Carolina, has been really good, but he's been one of the few bright spots on the defensive side of the ball. So I think it's a mixture of desperation and trying to really keep your offense on the field and win a game.
Last 2011, Oakland goes 7 for 13. Actually tied for looks like ninth in the league, just under Kansas City, with fourth down attempts and conversions. Mike,
yeah, see, and that stat right there, not to cut you off, Nick, but that stat right there is telling because you look at last year's team, and last year's team, you know, you always got to factor in the Raiders have had arguably the best special teams unit in the NFL for the last couple of years. We all know Janikowski's been a Pro Bowler and Shane Leckler's been a Pro Bowler. So going for 63, 64-yard field goals is not out of range. If anybody who's followed the Raiders for years knows with Janikowski. And also flipping field position where Leckler is always key. And you can tell just from that stat that they were going for it, you know, more often, converting more often because they trusted their big back, Michael Bush, to gain those tough yards in those fourth down situations. I think you are right that it's more of desperation now at this point. But 3 of 11, it's alarming. It's a very telling stat, and I don't think it really speaks to the Raiders' record, but it doesn't help.
I know when we talked about notes during the week, play in the fourth quarter at about the 8-minute mark with the fumble, basically a blown call by the ref. Mike, impact on the game. Could it have made a difference? The Raiders in the third quarter have, of course, had shut out Cincinnati. They had scored 10, kept Cincinnati from scoring. Game got a little more competitive. It's 24-10 at that point. Then, of course, we have the fumble in the fourth quarter. What happens there?
Well, basically, it's just a really good play by, Bengals linebacker Ray Maliuga to get the ball from Carson Palmer there. But let me take you through the play. Basically, what happened was it's 27-10. The Bengals, I believe it's a second down or third down situation. And Andy Dalton checks down to Mohamed Sanu, which is in the flat, coming across on a crossing pattern. Ball gets stripped out by Yselio Hansen, the corner, and as it's falling out of bounds, he tips it back inbounds to teammate Tyron Branch, who runs it in for a touchdown. Well, unfortunately, an inadvertent whistle had blown on the play. Now, if we take you back a couple years ago to the I don't know if you remember, but this happened in the Chargers game where that Hockenry's crew, an inadvertent whistle had blown. Similar situation, negating a score on the defensive side for the Chargers. And it's in the rule book that if an inadvertent whistle is blown dead, the play can either be done over, the offensive team has the option of being done, doing the play over again, or taking the ball where the actual fumble occurred, because the whistle blew as the ball was coming out. So I think the referee had seen Hansen maybe step out of bounds, which they showed later on replay he did not. It was a very big pivotal moment because that score would have put the Raiders down 27-17. Still a lot of time left in the game, especially only down 10 points. And like we had just said, they were down 24-0 at half. And at that point, they had only allowed 3 points in the second half. So the Raiders defense was starting to get a little bit more rhythm. The Raiders offense had put up 10 points up to that point. And really the 3.5 were coming down the Cincinnati side of the ball. And it really spiraled downhill from there because, like I said, the next play, a false start penalty was called, but no whistles were blown until late, and Lamar Houston sacks Andy Dalton, which leads in turn to left tackle Andre Whitworth coming over, objecting to that. The two of them fighting, Tommy Kelly being thrown into the fracas. All 3 players were ejected. And then the next play after that, on just a play action deep post route by A.J. Green over 2 defenders for a 70-yard gain. And right after that, the Bengals scored on a Jermaine Gresham touchdown that pretty much saved the game at 34-10. So a major momentum swing in the game. The Raiders, don't know if the Raiders would have won, obviously, but it was a very big play in the game.
It brings us to, now, of course, that brings Oakland to 3-8, and they're, of course, going to be hosting Cleveland this Sunday. Mike, at 3-8, and you factor in the McClain situation, are players essentially playing for their jobs next year?
Well, you have to remember something. When a new coach takes over, especially Dennis Allen in his first year, he signed a 4 or 5 year deal. So players have to be leery that, hey, this guy's going to be here longer than I'm going to be here probably. So at this point, in essence, you are playing for your job. You're playing for personal pride. A lot of athletes will always tell you, if you love the game, you're going out there and you're giving 110%, but you never know the contractual status of some of these players, if that's factoring into performance. If you're a Raider fan right now, while it is tough at 3-8, you're looking to see maybe some growth. Maybe, Carson to limit the mistakes because he has been very turnover prone this year as opposed to last year. And I think it was because he was very comfortable with the system under Hugh Jackson. He ran it at USC when Jackson recruited him. He ran it for him in Cincinnati when Jackson was the wide receivers coach and part of the offensive staff. So the terminology was basically the same. Now, you're asking Carson to come in and pretty much learn Greg Knapp's new system, which has some of the principles that Hugh Jackson incorporates, but it's very new terminology. Jacoby Ford's been out for the year. His speedster receiver. Hayward Bay has missed some games with an injury. Denarius Moore has not been himself from last year. You could point to a sophomore slump. I'm using air quotes there. All of these things add up now, and was one of the reasons why I wanted Hugh Jackson to come back, because of continuity of the staff. And then you've seen Carson regress, and you hope that maybe next year and going into the future, the Raiders get some draft picks on the offensive and defensive side of the ball that are some game changers, because they are going to be picking pretty high in this coming year's draft. And you look to maybe the future and add some pieces here and there in the passing game, something to help them out. Obviously, I think running back now is clearly an issue because this is the second season in a row Dan McFadden has not been able to stay healthy through a full season. And while we all talk about how talented he is, so I wouldn't say it's time to move away from the McFadden era, but I think it is time to get him some help and maybe draft a running back in this coming 2013 class that can help out the Raiders in that situation.
Mike, we're going to take it to a break now. Folks, coming back, why you may not be able to see the Raiders play this Sunday on television, and we're going to go around the league. Stay tuned. Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Hi, this is Nick Zaveri from the Nick Zaveri Podcast with Mike Leon here to talk about the art of shaving. I just got one of their great shaving kits for my birthday, and I'm already thinking about getting more of their products for Christmas. Shave brushes, non-alcohol shave creams, great pre-shave oils, and a soothing aftershave balm make shaving that much better. Visit theartofshaving.com to find a store near you. Folks, they're everywhere. Just looking at a New York subway map and you can see at least 7 locations just in Manhattan. Some locations also have a barber on site to give you a perfect shave. If you can't stick around for that perfect shave, be sure to pick up their products and have a great shave from the comfort of your own home. The Art of Shaving. It's just a better shave. Visit theartofshaving.com. That's THE, artofshaving.com for more information and the final location near you.
This your boy Quali BKMC. Let your body rock and loud in the house. So I can show you just what I waited for the DJ. Let your body rock.
Mike, is it possible that I may not be able to see the game on Sunday? Folks, thank you for again joining us on the Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon on the podcast. NPZ1978, of course, or rather youtube.com/NPZ1978. Mike, in your time working in sports, from your perspective, what is an NFL blackout? How does it work? All I know right now is the game is being blacked out. Apparently, locally, the team was unable to sell at least 85% of their tickets. So I guess locally or local television-wise, fans will not be able to see the game. Does that affect Red Zone? Does that affect the rest of the country?
Well, no, and Nick, as always, Red Zone is part of the DirecTV NFL package. So that's something that, since they're cutting in and out of games and live feeds, if you have to live in the open market, obviously you'll be able to see the game on Red Zone, but obviously you're only going to see it incrementally because they tend to show teams that are within the Red Zone area and going in for a score. The NFL blackout rules, like you said, Nick, it just recently got changed where the home teams now have the option of selling 85% of game tickets to avoid a blackout in their local TV market. And it's one of the things I experienced down here in the Miami area because the Dolphins have been subjected to a couple of blackout saving tactics where owner Stephen Ross will actually buy a percentage of the tickets, donating them to local charities so the game is seen locally. In the hopes that with the way the Dolphins have been playing, they've an up and down season, but a lot of people expect them to be worse. You think that maybe fans will start to see that the team is a little bit better than they are, and that in turn will lead to revenue in terms of them coming to the games and so on and so forth. What I find very shocking is, and you got to remember something, especially with the economic decline that the country's in, and with Oakland being, one of the most depressed areas in the country right now in terms of unemployment, that is a major factor as to why this blackout rule was changed recently. You had areas like Cincinnati and Jacksonville, teams in those respective markets that were struggling to fill the seats, and they have some of the smaller stadiums around the NFL. Cincinnati had 70,000, Jacksonville was 56,000. So it was eased by Commissioner Goodell to be able to give the fans in those respective cities, through this economic climate right now that we're experiencing, a chance to be able to watch the game on TV. So the fact that article was released recently that the Raiders, would not be shown locally in Oakland is very alarming to me, especially with how lax the blackout rules have been recently lifted by Commissioner Goodell. It speaks a lot to, it's not so much the fan base. You can't blame the fans at this time in this kind of situation. Tickets are extremely expensive. To bring a family of four or something like that to a Raiders game, it's going to run you somewhere in the neighborhood of $200, $250. So it's a very expensive day. You also have to pay for parking. You got to factor in concession stands. And for the average Joe who's out there working on a $50,000 a year salary to be able to go one game to the Raiders versus the Cleveland Browns, two of the teams that have the worst records in the National Football League, is just not something high on their wish list. So you can't blame the fans in this situation. It's very unfortunate that it's going to happen. And you just hope that going forward the team starts to improve a little bit better, because this is not the first time you've heard of this happening in Oakland. Like I said, Oakland has been subject to a couple blackout games within the last couple years. And so this is not something that they're new. That just recently started with Oakland. They've had a history, especially at the Oakland Alameda Coliseum, going back with some blackouts within the last couple of years that they have been not so much playing as well. Under the Jackson Cable regime, they got a little bit better, but in the Lane Kiffin days, there were some blackouts that were incurred. It takes a lot into account the opponent that they're playing at the time, team's record, and like I said, the fiscal state that Oakland, California is in right now is not very good. And Commissioner Goodell also released something, I believe it was a couple weeks ago, talking about television sales and HD televisions, 3D TVs that are being released now by some of these companies like Samsung and LG that make the television watching experience a lot better than actually going to the game. And it speaks something to the commissioner publicly stating that electronics and technology is hindering his game right now. I found that very alarming that he thought something like that, which is, you're hearing more and more of it, because we're moving to a generation where everyone's more technologically sound, and you're seeing people with better high-definition televisions, surround sound systems that make the experience of watching it at home better than spending $200-$300 to actually go to a game. And I think the NFL will have to change and adapt. The price of tickets are going to have to come down. You're seeing a lot of stadiums adding PSLs, which make it even tougher for the common fan to go to a game. So I think this is something Goodell and his staff will address in the offseason. I don't know if you can lift the blackout rules any more than you've already lifted them so far and made them so lax, but this is something that the NFL has circled, and I'm sure they'll be talking about it in the offseason.
Isn't it a little ridiculous, though, for a league, or any company for that matter, that makes billions of dollars? That's billions with a B, ladies and gentlemen. For a league like that to complain about the potential lack of attendance, I mean, when's enough for this commissioner? We got between fines this week, of course, and the fines for Sue and Ed Reed. It just weekly, the league just rakes in money, and for them to complain openly about technology just seems a bit the height of stupidity. Not even stupidity, just the height of arrogance on behalf of the NFL, especially for a league that makes multi-million-dollar deals for television. That's what I don't understand. How can you complain about TV sales or the technology behind televisions when you have made a point to make your league the most profitable league in the history of American sports, primarily through television. I just don't understand that. And that's just me, obviously, on a rant with this commissioner. And it's been a bad week for commissioners, Mike. We're not even get into the stupidity of David Stern and the Spurs thing. I think maybe we'll get into that later on, maybe on another show or whatever. But I just don't get it. I just don't understand that. And that leads me to my next point about Thursday Night Football. And we're going to start, folks, our Around the League talk there on the Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon, youtube.com/MPZ1978. Mike, are you still watching Thursday Night Football?
You know, it's funny. I tell people all the time, you know, sometimes, and I'm working at ESPN, and you see the schedule released before the season, and you look at some of these matchups, and it's very tough to predict how a season is going to go for a team. So you have to remember something, that CBS and Fox always can protect a game per week that they want to keep on their networks. Okay, all these networks have so much money invested into these national doubleheaders, and in terms of, you know, the eyeballs that they know are going to be watching the game nationally, they always pick a game that they can protect. NBC obviously gets first pickings after that in terms of what games they want to put on their Sunday night slate, and then with the ability to flex their games from week 13 on into that Sunday night slate so they can give people better matchups. Then you have Monday Night Football that picks after that. So then the last one that actually picks is Thursday Night Football. You got lucky this week with Saints Falcons, which wasn't a great matchup because of the Saints being at 5-6 right now, but it ended up being a really good game. Drew Brees obviously throwing the 5 interceptions didn't help for a lot of fantasy league owners out there like myself. And the Falcons, you know, improved to 11-1, and then with a Buccaneers loss this Sunday at the Broncos, they'll clinch the division. But these Thursday night matchups have not been very good. You know, the Miami-Buffalo game, both teams were below 500. There's a couple of matchups coming up that involve the Raiders on Thursday Night Football. There's another one there that involves you had the Browns and Ravens in another one, which ended up being a good game. But before the season started, you look at that game and go, you know, you're not expecting the Browns to be very good. You do expect the Ravens to be very good. I, myself, Thursday Night Football, the NFL just started this year with actually putting Thursday night games throughout the entire league schedule. Before, it was always done in the month of December, once college football has ended, that these Thursday night games would kind of be on there so they can have the national spotlight to themselves as opposed to competing with Thursday night college football on ESPN. But I am not, myself, I'm not watching the Thursday night games. I'd be curious to see what the national numbers and overnight numbers do, especially don't forget, TNT always has their NBA Thursday night doubleheaders. And this past Thursday was obviously the Heat Spurs game. You had a really good game with the Nuggets. So they always have been reserved for that slot. And Thursday has now become, in television, everyone knows Thursday is one of those slots where you put your primetime TV comedies for some of the CBS's, NBC's, and Fox's of the world that have their primetime sitcoms, and they put them on the Thursday hour. Well, now in the sports world, it's kind of become your showcase with the Thursday Night Football for ESPN, Thursday Night Football now with NFL Network, the NBA with their two key marquee matchups on Thursday night. Next week will be Knicks Heat on Thursday night. So a lot of people are looking for that Thursday primetime slot, and I'm very shocked that the NFL this year went to a Thursday night slot, especially when these other sports are still in season.
I go back to what I was saying about the television thing before and the arrogance of this league. Because, and I keep coming back to this was a great point that Jason Whitlock of Fox Sports had brought up about the league schedule. The Baltimore Ravens at one point this year played 4 games in 17 days. Now, traditionally, 4 games should take you the matter of 28 days or 35, depending on a bye week. You somehow went and scrunched it up into almost half. To no one's surprise, players got hurt. How is this commissioner possibly going to sell us all on the alleged interest in saving the league and keeping players healthy while mandating a Thursday night schedule, which basically makes it feel like an 18-game schedule with the amount of injuries to players and just putting teams in a situation where you're playing, in some cases, two games within 5 days? This is just reckless, I think, on behalf of this commissioner. It was a nuance a couple of years ago when NFL Network started having Thursday Night Football after Thanksgiving and then going ahead and just doing the last 6 weeks. Now to start that from the first game of the year through week 17, it would serve this league well that if Tom Brady, who, by the way, has yet to play on Thursday night other than this recent game against Thanksgiving for some reason, but the Ravens have no problem getting put there on a semi-regular basis, I would love nothing more than to watch a marquee player, God forbid, get hurt on Thursday Night Football. Just so I could see this league have to respond to a possible Super Bowl matchup of Russell Wilson and the Seattle Seahawks against, say, Andy Dalton and the Bengals, and just watch the television numbers tank. Wow, I'm full of rants.
Yeah. I was going to say. Well, I know. A lot of people listen. Goodell has probably had arguably his worst last 2 years here under stewardship under his guidance, because not only with the lockout where he was public enemy number one, you see that at the draft that always happened in April at Radio City Music Hall, he's booed very often and loudly. The same thing happened for Commissioner Stern in the NBA, and I know your love for him, Nick, and I'm saying that facetiously. But these commissioners now, it's very tough because, and I hate to go back to the NBA, but you look at what Popovich just did with the Spurs, and this is a tactic he's been doing to keep his team fresh, but it was a product of the NBA scheduling, 6 games and 9 nights. He's got 4 players on his team that are all 30 plus, and he's trying to keep his team fresh for a playoff stretch. And you look at some of like what you talked about with the major injury. Now, we haven't done that on Thursday night so far yet, but you would almost hope, and I hate to wish injury on anybody, but how that would affect the team and how an organization, let's say, like if it were like a Brady getting hurt in that meaningless 49-12 victory over the Jets, if he had gotten hurt, Bob Kraft is one of the key integral owners that ended up settling the lockout dispute, how he would react about that, saying, hey, here I am on a short week having to play, and my best player gets hurt and now jeopardizes a shot for us to win, a championship. I think the problem is, and it's twofold, because I think right now the NFL is looking at it as they try to make, not so much the matchups, but they try to make the travel less. If you remember 2 years ago, the Thursday night game, I think it might have been last year, was the Harbaugh Bowl, but they had the Niners traveling West Coast to the East Coast to the Ravens. And everyone was like, how are you going to make the Niners play a short week and now we got to travel across 3 time zones to play a Thursday night game just because of TV money? It shows to the greed of these commissioners and trying to capitalize on their dollars. And, we talked about it already with the HD television situation. But, LG is one of the premier sponsors of the National Football League, just like Air is one of the sponsors of the National Basketball Association. So they have contractual obligations with these sponsors that are television companies, and yet in the same breath he's bashing them about the experience of, hey, you're making your product too good when no one wants to come to our game. So I don't think Goodell has had a really good couple of years here, with not only with the St. County game, this Ed Reed situation that just recently happened, where he was fined for a hit that everybody in the National Football League laughed at, as it was happening in Game Street, that, hey, that isn't even a finable offense. They said it was kind of a 3 strikes you're out policy, and meanwhile, no one can point to the other 2 strikes. So I think Goodell is not, he hasn't had a good couple of years here. Same thing can be said with David Stern. I think that the greed is starting to settle in. It's really not about player safety. One of the comments was made about some of these concussion hits. Meanwhile, the NFL markets a DVD on their website that says the NFL's greatest hits, and it's about tackles and bone-crushing hits. And here they are in the same breath finding these players for the way they're tackling and stuff like that. So very hypocritical of both leagues. And I don't know what can be done right now. The NFL knows they're extremely profitable because of the fans, because the fans keep watching in droves, because of the TV deals that they keep getting from CBS and Fox in terms of the financial wherewithal that they have to continue to operate these leagues, and they're making money in merchandising. So can it ever be stopped? I mean, the only way it can be stopped is if fans stop watching, and you and I both know that's not going to happen.
No, not anytime soon. Mike, let's take a break here. When we get back, let's do this. Let's do maybe 1 or 2 games of the week that we found very telling. And And then we're going to switch the conversation to, I think, an actually bright spot. I didn't think this was actually possible, but I think college football might be in a better situation than the NFL. Folks, stick around. We'll be right back on the Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon on the podcast, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Stick around. Sticking with the rest of the league on the Nick Zaveri Show, courtesy of youtube.com, actually, NPZ1978 with Mike Leon. Mike, I have actually managed to go 40 minutes and 55 seconds without you plugging your Twitter handle. Shame on me.
at DAKIDLEO and at the Kid Leon.
Thank you. And of course, folks can find me on twitter.com, NPZ1978 for all things that are nerdy, sports related, maybe even sometimes relationship related if I feel like getting in trouble with my fiance. So, Mike, we are back. So we're back with NFL talk. Just going to wrap up a little bit about around the league. Mike, I'm going to start with a big picture question. Philadelphia and San Diego, two teams extremely successful in the last decade. For San Diego, a combination of Marty Schottenheimer and North Turner as coaches, and Andy Reid, and for Philadelphia, just Andy Reid as the head coach. It's safe to say both teams are going to go over major organizational changes in the offseason. How do you account for the fact of two teams being that successful for a decade and only one Super Bowl appearance between the two of them?
Well, I think a lot of it factors in, in terms of who they played in those games. You got to remember, when San Diego went to the AFC title game, there's Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. So not easy sledding. I think the best chance the Eagles had was the year that, I believe it was the last year of the bet where they played the Buccaneers at home, and the Buccaneers were underdog, but that was the year, as we know, Nick, the Raiders were in the Super Bowl that year, and the Buccaneers ended up beating the Raiders. That was probably the best year the Eagles had in terms of being able to go to the Super Bowl. Now, they did go to the Super Bowl later on, and of course, they lost that Super Bowl game, and everyone knows Phil Owens was hurt, but in that Super Bowl, he still had a 9-catch performance. I think the problem with Philadelphia has been Andy Reid, and the Eagles fans always say Andy Reid has made some questionable decisions in terms of the play calling in this West Coast offense. He doesn't get the ball to his backs. He doesn't like running the football. They're a very heavy passing offense, and he had the stereotypical black quarterback who can throw and run and should be more of and trying to make them more of a passer as opposed to letting the game flow for them. And I think now you see the draft pick of Nick Foles, who's more of like a pocket passer. So it's easier now for maybe in the transition. You see the Eagles are starting to play him a little bit more. There's some talk about that maybe the Eagles are now letting Michael Vick pass this concussion test to play Nick Foles so they can see what they have more of him. I think Reid has done a really good job in drafting. I think the problem in San Diego has been the regression of Philip Rivers. Philip Rivers has become a very turnover-prone quarterback now all of a sudden. His decision-making has been questioned. And it's very tough if you're going to lead the league in turnovers like he did last year, and now this year he's not playing very well, and it's suffering in terms of their overall record. You also got to look at some of these additions to their teams that have left in the last couple of years through free agency. The Eagles letting go of Brian Dawkins, a mainstay on their defensive secondary for years. Then you look at San Diego getting rid of Darren Sproles, who was arguably their best return man and a very good scat back for them. So they've both gone through personnel changes. I really think that, unfortunately, both coaches are going to be done after this year, and it's not so much a record now. It's more of the fan base growing tired with the same message, and there's a lot to be said for a coach who continues to give the same message, and because there only comes a point where these professional athletes, it falls on deaf ears. And I think we've reached a point for both teams where it's time to make a coaching change and maybe time to make organizational changes with the general manager and above.
One game you brought up early when we were talking during the week about games to spotlight this week was, of course, Bucs-Falcons, which is funny, of course, because we were talking about the Falcons and Saints on Thursday Night Football. The league moves a lot faster than our podcast, unfortunately, does. Mike, Bucks Falcons Sunday. What makes it stand out? What does the game tell us about the Bucks? Where are they in their playoff chances? And it's been a rough week for the Falcons, a challenging week for Atlanta. What does a week like this tell us with some tough divisional games?
Well, for the Falcons, for them to come out 2-0, I think is a very telling. Obviously everyone's going to wait for postseason to judge this team. They are now 11-1 with the best record in the NFL. They have, Matt Ryan, who hasn't played well the last couple weeks. He's another one that's been turnover prone this year. And you would think with the weapons that he has, and Julio Jones and Roddy White and Tony Gonzalez playing his best ball in his last season in the NFL, allegedly, according to some sources around him. I think Tony has stated that publicly that it might be his last season. And he's doing this pretty much without a run game. Michael Turner has regressed. Jeffrey Rogers has stepped in and filled a little bit of that role, but he's an undersized running back, more of like a Dexter McCluster type of back on Kansas City, where he can come in for a couple carries, be the third down back. So I think Atlanta, for them to go 2-0 in this stretch, very telling. What it tells about the Buccaneers, I think the Buccaneers, like we've been talking about, and I said earlier in one of our podcasts about Greg Schiano being up for Coach of the Year. Here they are, they're 6-5, a tough game against Denver coming up, but the steps that Josh Freeman has taken, since week 5, Josh Freeman has passed for way close to 2,000 yards. He has 16 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. And the only person that's been better in terms of a quarterback in the league has been Peyton Manning. And we've already Peyton Manning has thrown 18 touchdowns to 3 interceptions in that same time frame. So I think the Buccaneers, they've proven that they can play in this division with the Saints now being at 5-7 after this loss on Thursday. They are probably out of the NFC playoff race. As it stands right now, there's a couple of teams at 6-5. Seattle's at 6-5. Minnesota's at 6-5. Tampa Bay's at 6-5, sitting, at 7 on the outside looking in. And then you have Washington with a big game Monday night against the Giants. And they're at 5-6 after their Thanksgiving thrashing of the Cowboys. I think it speaks a lot to the NFC South. We said before the year was going to be a really good competitive division because of the Falcons, because of the Bucks, because of what we saw with the Saints, and that the Panthers with Cam Newton in the second year. But it hasn't worked out that way. You got to give credit to the Falcons. You play who's on your schedule, and so far in 12 games they're victorious in 11. So far they've been very, very impressive. Just in terms of them being able to get the overall win.
It's usually a sign of Armageddon when the Cleveland Browns beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they did that this past Sunday. This is Cleveland's first win in 17 tries against the Steelers. My favorite story of that game, of course, comes courtesy of the Associated Press. Management for Cleveland was thinking about handing out white towels to the Browns fans to combat the terrible towel out of Pittsburgh, until cooler heads prevailed, realizing that a group of fans waving the white towel looks an awful lot like waving the white flag, which is what Cleveland has done for the past few years against Pittsburgh. Mike, the last Pittsburgh win came against Kansas City, who we unfortunately began the show with today, with a close overtime win over the now 1-10 Kansas City Chiefs. Mike, Pittsburgh's lost 2 in a row. It's been reported that Roethlisberger will not start against Baltimore this weekend. Is it possible the Steelers are going to lose 3 games in a row and put themselves in a pretty tight spot for a wild card?
Well, like we just talked about before, the NFC picture with a lot of teams at 6-5, the AFC picture, is not helping Pittsburgh right now. Pittsburgh is in the 6th seed right now, and Indianapolis is a game ahead in the 7-4. But like I said, Cincinnati's right behind them, nipping at their heels. They've won 3 in a row to put themselves in this situation. They do play at San Diego, a team who just lost to the Ravens at home on a big 4th and 29 play by Rutgers dad himself and Ray Rice. So the Bengals are right there. The Dolphins are 5-6 with a very tough game this week against New England. But about the Steelers, we're looking at San Francisco for a second in terms of their quarterback situation, and they have 2 quarterbacks who they can rely on to go into a game and win them a football game because they're built on defense and the running game. Now, you flash over to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is built in a similar model, a good defense, similar style, good defense, a good running game. Jonathan Dwyer, good O-line up front, win the game in the trenches, and have really solid quarterback play. But when Ben Roethlisberger, who likes to move in the pocket and takes a lot of hits and keeps on kicking, but when he gets hurt, I feel like the Steelers and Mike Tomlin have not done a good job of drafting at the quarterback position somebody for the backup or maybe getting a competent veteran in there. I mean, Charlie Batch is in his 15th year in the league, and you're counting on a Charlie Batch, Byron Leftwich situation to kind of guide you through, and you have major injuries to the defense. Ryan Clark, Troy Polamalu hasn't played since, I believe, week 8. So there's major injuries for the Steelers, and now the biggest injury of all, the one they can't afford to happen, which was Roethlisberger, comes at a crucial time where they're playing division opponents right now and AFC conference opponents. And like I said, the Bengals are one of the hottest teams in the league right now and is right behind them for that final playoff spot. The telling stat from Sunday was Cleveland forcing those 8 Steelers turnovers, and some were fumbles, a couple interceptions, but the Steelers and then the Browns were my upset pick from last week that I told a lot of people about because the Browns are a little bit better.
You did not. I'm going to cut you off on this one. You did not pick the Browns over the. You really? They haven't won in 17 games.
Nick, I swear I picked the Browns because a couple people that listen to this.
I want a witness. Whoever did it, please email me. You can get me at mpz1978@gmail.com or post a comment on the show or even find us on Facebook. You did not take the Browns over the Steelers.
Well, you got to remember something. Before the Browns, if you look at the Browns season in totality, and I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a Cleveland advocate, but Cleveland played a very good game up at the Giants Stadium. Up double digits in that game earlier in the year, ended up losing 41-27. They played a good Thursday night game against Baltimore and lost 23-16. Before the year, they lost by a point to the Eagles at home. Everybody remembers that. That was a big game where he had 4 turnovers. Their defense has played a lot better, and the secondary with Joe Hayden, TJ Ward, they played a lot better and more, and they're getting some pressure now. Phil Taylor is starting to assert himself on the defensive line. Trent Richardson looks like, a good candidate for rookie year, and the way he's been running the football. So before this game, you looked at the injury to Roethlisberger, you looked at them making a change with Leftwich and Batch, and not to mention the Ryan Clark injury for the Steelers. And let's not forget, Antonio Brown, the Steelers' best receiver, did not play in Sunday's game. This was announced before the game started. And all of a sudden, Flexible Burks was signed before that. And he had to fill in and kind of learn the offense on the go. Because remember, he wasn't drafted when Tomlin was there. He was a holdover from the old Tower regime. It was going to be a learning curve. And I thought the Steelers, now, did I think the Browns could force 8 turnovers? No, but I thought the Browns would be in that game and would have an opportunity to win it. And not win it comfortably, but win like a 3-point game because of the defenses of both teams. And like I said, if you look back at the Browns' track record, I fully expect the Browns to win this Sunday, even at Oakland, and much of the things you say because of the way their defense has played and the way they've been running the ball. Now, it all depends on Brandon Wheaton's health, but you'll get some emails from the podcast, Nick, that'll validate you taking the Browns.
Mike, the story out of San Francisco about Colin Kaepernick is fascinating. I've never heard of a team that, because of course I preface this by giving my own disclaimer because everyone always thinks of Bledsoe and Brady, but Alex Smith is fully recovered from a concussion. Colin Kaepernick steps in, wins 2 in a row. Last game goes 16 for 25 for 231 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. And Coach Harbaugh, who came out all of last season, saying that Alex Smith was his quarterback. This was going to be the guy he was going to run with. This was going to be the guy that he was going to win with, has suddenly changed his tune and is now preaching to the gospel of the hot hand theory. Mike, can you think of a time when a team went this way where the starter came back healthy, but just was basically relegated to the bench? And do we think Colin Kaepernick could lead this team, I got to say Super Bowl at this point, because they would be logically the favorites to win?
Here's a couple of things about the Kaepernick situation. First off, I don't want to make Alex Smith sound like, the second coming of Montana, but Alex Smith has slowly gotten Jim Harbaugh's offense now in his second year. All right, he's an undersigned at 6 feet, and that's generous what he's listed as the media guy. And you got to remember something, Harbaugh originally drafted Kaepernick, from his days of playing in Nevada at 6'5", wanted a big quarterback, wanted to go with somebody who can run throw the ball and can see over the line and gives him that option of a big 6'5" quarterback. And remember, Harbaugh's about 6'3" himself when he played in the league. He had Andrew Luck, who was a big 6'3", 6'4" quarterback who can give you some mobility in the pocket, stretch the field with a big arm, and can also take off on running plays. And so, since he built that type of style in the college game, he wanted something similar to emulate in the pros. And I think Alex Smith, like I said, was a holdover. It's his fourth offense that he's learned now since he's been drafted number 1 overall out of Utah to the Niners. And I think that this is, I haven't seen it recently where a hot game situation where a quarterback was given an opportunity because he played well in a couple games to take over the starter's position from the incumbent. But I think that he's making the right decision right now. Listen, the Jets did for a long time, holding Pennington out for 4 years. We all know when Carson was drafted number 1 overall, he didn't play right away. They sat him for a couple of years so he can learn the offense under John Kitna. And this happens a lot of times where the starter, highly drafted quarterback, will come in and learn from the starter. The difference here, I think, is I don't think Alex Smith is on the level of some of those other quarterbacks that I mentioned when they were taking over for their incumbents. And so, in other words, I think Colin Kaepernick gives the Niners a better chance to win right now than Alex Smith. He's a taller quarterback. He can move in the pocket very well. And I think because of that, he gives them the better option to win. And I would agree with Jim Harbaugh in terms of staying with Kaepernick over Alex Smith at this point.
We're going to take a stop right there. Folks, when we come back, you get to find out what is the only Thursday night football game that I watched this year so far. And shockingly, it has nothing to do with the NFL. Stick around, youtube.com/NPZ1978 with the great and incomparable Michael James Leon. That's not really his middle name. Let's find out what that is next. Oh, yes. Yes. Oh, that's great. That's absolutely great. I fortunately managed to find that courtesy of YouTube, actually. But, Mike, that would have been better if they had won on Thursday, of course. Of course, that was Sister Sledge with We Are Family, the live version. And I think anyone who saw the game can probably speak to where family comes from. Mike, were you ready for that? I mean, we're going to talk about the win or rather the loss in a moment. What was up with that? I heard about that story from Shiano, but everyone wearing family on the back of the jersey, I thought that was pretty cool.
Well, they did it earlier this year, Nick, when Rutgers played Connecticut in Week 5. It was a scheduled blackout game. Basically, the new jerseys that are provided by Nike come in a 3-color set. So they wear their road whites, home reds, and then they have an alternate black jersey that they wear for special events where they have a blackout where the entire student section is given a black T-shirt that says "Our Football," and then they decided this year to stitch onto the black jersey the acronym FAMILY, which stands for Forget About Me, I Love You, which is seen a lot in the football complex. There's a bunch of different things that Shiano has incorporated into the program in terms of slogans. Another one was TBA, which is Trust, Belief, Accountability. There's also a clock in the Rutgers locker room that as soon as the game is over, flips to the next opponent and counts down the days, hours, and minutes. So Rutgers says the next opponent, as Coach Shanley used to say, your biggest enemy is time. And so with that, they have that in the locker room. So there's a lot of different little acronyms that are around the program. Obviously, everybody knows about the keep shopping. The players run out into the field with an axe, and there is a stump in the corner of the end zone where they all gather around and they chop into the axe for one of the selected captains for the game. So a lot of cool things that Coach Shiano started with this program when he took over in 2001, and he has left and that Coach Foot has picked up on. But the family one was a big thing because last year's team was right there to win a share of the Big East crown and lost at Connecticut in a game where they really weren't competitive from start to finish in that game. And so this year, a lot of the mantra was about let's do this year in our senior years and finally win a Big East championship for this school.
See, this is where, folks, this is the difference between Mike Leon and I. Of course, youtube.com/NPZ1978, the Nick Zaveri show with Mike Leon. Mike is such an avid knowledgeable resource in all things Rutgers, that for him, being this close to a conference championship and a Big East crown seemed almost not inevitable, but it was kind of, we're on the right track. Like, this didn't seem to come out of nowhere. Me, however, graduating from Rutgers back in 2001 and have basically just pretty much just not had paid nearly as much attention, was just shocked that this team was nationally televised game, a game away, rather, a drop catch or even interception away from beating Louisville and going on to a BCS conference. Mike, I can't wrap my head around that.
Well, you got to remember, Rutgers put themselves in a couple positions now under, the Shiano stewardship of being able to play for a conference championship. Everyone knows the big night in 06 against Louisville when both teams came into that game at 8-0. Rutgers won that night, ended up winning one of their next two, which they used actually win two of their next three back in 06. They finished the year that year 10-2, losing triple overtime at West Virginia, a very good West Virginia team that has Steve Slayton and Pat White, although White didn't play in that game. Jared Brown actually had backup played in that game. And so Rutgers lost that game, and eerily similar 6 years later, playing for a Big East title, the same thing that happened in 06, where Rutgers was playing for the BCS berth and the outright Big East championship. The same things that happened in 06, a big drop touchdown catch on a wide open James Townsend, I believe it was a deep post across the middle, where he dropped that. There was also in that game a inadvertent whistle, which was funny because Steve Clayton had fumbled and they had moved him down, but he fumbled in that game, and Rutgers took it because he fumbled on his own 10-yard line. They took it in for the score, and it got negated because the referees had said he was down. And this was before the new college football replay rules, where you can actually call a timeout and then challenge the play. So this was before that. So eerily similar, and the reason I say because when you fast forward to Thursday night's game with the fake field goal, where a penalty is called on it that negated a Rutgers score that would have been a 21-3. Pretty much, I wouldn't say sealing the game, but a 3-touchdown lead with your defense, which is ranked fourth nationally in the country behind only, Alabama and some of these other big SEC schools defensively. You would think that the defense would take you home and win at that point. And like we mentioned before, Timmy Wright, who's a 6'4" senior, a captain on the team from Lowell, New Jersey, who has been really reliable for Gary Nova, the quarterback, all year as an option in the passing game, dropped a really big 50-yard completion, which would have put Rutgers probably in the red zone, at least at the 15, maybe 10-yard line, for maybe even a possible score because he only had the safety guarding him, and he really didn't have whatchamacallit. There was nobody else that would have been able to make that tackle had he just broken that tackle. So eerily similar to what happened in 06, and you feel for a lot of the seniors in the program. The Cassine Green, who's Mel Kiper's big boy, is one of the top linebacking prospects. You feel for Scott Balloon, who's another defensive tackle will probably get late drafted, maybe 6th or 7th round. That's on the defensive side of the ball, but they still have one game left. Rutgers is going to be in a bowl game, and right now the early preliminary talks is that they'll be playing in Orlando on December 28th in the Rush Athletic Bowl against Virginia Tech. So you get a decent opponent and a chance to, maybe win your 10th game of the year, and it'll be a third 10-win season in Rutgers history and sending seniors out on a good note, but very disappointing all around. Not so much from a standpoint of you're disappointed, it's just more of, a 9-win season at Rutgers is no longer, par for the course. It's part of the norm, and we're disappointed with 9 wins, which is, I think, a vast improvement from when you went to school, Nick, and the way the shape the program was in back then.
I like the little dig right there when you went to school, Nick. I went that much further further than you. Mike and I are both old heads when it comes to Rutgers football. But yes, it is that. And just going back to what you just said about 9 wins is not good enough. I mean, I do remember this team being a place that was just a place to showcase talent on other teams. Mike Vick, of course, in 1997 had come out with Vatek and just put a beating on us. Of course, I just went with the we thing, and that's always very divisive in sports analysis to go we. I mean, it's understandable as a fan, but professionally, it's not cool. But anyway, but yes, and then every Miami running back, I think, a rite of passage was to just absolutely devastate the Rutgers defense. So to say that 9 wins is no longer good enough is very telling, and it times out very well that they are about to move into the Big Ten conference. And with all of us questioning, can this team or at least this program be able to step their game up and be able to take on the Michigans, Ohio States, Iowa States of the Big Ten, and still be able to 9 wins? I think next year would be unrealistic for when they start the Big Ten, but can they be a program that's competitive enough in the Big Ten to eventually win a Big Ten title or to be able to get into a BCS bowl game through that conference?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on Coach Flood and the coaching staff and the ability to recruit good high school players and talent evaluation in college is very different than the NFL because you got to remember something. In high school, the training program that these kids undergo is not similar to what you have in a college weight training program. You know, a lot of the pro athletes that graduated from Rutgers that play in the NFL now, Devin McCourty, Jason McCourty, Ray Rice, Kenny Britt, Ryan Leonard, that are all on their respective teams, all come back to work out at Rutgers because of the facilities, because of the weight room and the options that they have there in terms of working out and getting in a maximum workout. And I think that's different in the high school setting. So I think Coach Flood, a lot of it in college is you got to get these high schools into the gym, get them bigger, stronger, prepared for the style of football that you want to play. And I think Rutgers plays a good style of football to go to the Big Ten. I think they're going to have to open it up a little bit more in the passing game. They've been recruiting bigger old linemen. With Rutgers to move to the Big Ten and sponsored a couple of recruits just in the last couple of weeks. Big recruit Dorian Miller committed to the Scarlet Knights. I think he's one of the top linemen in New Jersey at 6'4", 305 pounds. They got a big white blue, which is ironic, a big wide receiver commitment on Thursday night, especially since, you know, a couple of drops in the passing game by the wide receivers, but a big wide receiver commitment out of Delaware, 6'4" receiver who's about 200 pounds. But you look at those body types for these high school athletes, and they're not going to come in right away and contribute unless they're like a 10-minute prospect. But once you get them into the college training program, they can add some weight to themselves and then get them onto the field. A lot of these guys, you see them redshirt, which still maintains a year of eligibility, but they can still practice with the team and work out with the team. They just can't play in the games. And I think it helps a lot of college programs, and Rutgers has been a beneficiary of it because they've been able to stockpile these redshirt guys like Jason McCourty with a redshirt, Devin McCourty with a redshirt, and you get these guys bigger and stronger and prepared mentally and physically to play at the college game. I think going into the Big Ten, I think Rutgers has a leg up because they're in a recruiting area that has good high school football. And what you're hearing from a lot of their recruits was, now that Rutgers is in the Big Ten, it's pretty much icing on the cake. They have top-notch facilities. They have a 53,000 seat on-campus stadium. And now I'm adding in the fact that I get to play Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Wisconsin on a regular basis, Nebraska even. I think it's only going to boost recruiting. You saw a great atmosphere on Thursday night from the 53,000 that were in attendance on Thursday. And I think when you add that into the mix in terms of New Jersey high school football being a very good recruiting ground, Pennsylvania has good high school football. Rutgers can pick now. They've always had a Florida pipeline of athletes that have gone, from the Fort Lauderdale, Miami-Dade area up to Rutgers. A couple of Rutgers key players on the offensive and defensive side of the ball are from, big high schools down here like Christopher Columbus, like Miramar High School that has produced some of the guys that are currently on the roster. I think you're going to see a big boost in recruiting, and I think Rutgers can be in the middle of the pack team, and they're middle of the pack team now in this sense. The question is, can they compete with the Ohio States and Michigan for that next step? And you got to see what division they're going to be in the Big Ten Conference. And I think they can. I really do think they can. And I'm trying to take the Rutgers glasses off and give you an overall perspective of where the program can go. But I think they actually can compete in the Big Ten Conference.
Going into the game, it's 14-3 at halftime. A friend of mine, of course, Corbett Thompson, who eventually I will probably try to get on this show, courtesy of Facebook. Corbett had asked me, it's 14-3. How do you possibly lose that game? And I respond with, when you look at the game holistically, the couple of numbers that stand out. First is the number 2, and the 2 represents the 2 horrible tackles, or even attempts at tackles, courtesy of Louisville, on the 85-yard touchdown pass from Nova, and the touchdown reception, 68 yards to Mark Harrison, both of which don't take place if you teach a safety or a cornerback how to wrap someone up. As big a Rutgers fan as I am extremely critical right now, and I sound like almost like a fan of Louisville, how terrible those hits were. Never mind the fact that Rutgers boasts some humongous wide receivers. I did not know we were bringing in that kind of size for talent at the wide receiver position. But Louisville, with just some pathetic attempts at an Ed Reed level hit, just did not do anything. And it's 14-3 Rutgers. You're thinking objectively that, okay, they've got the big play capacity. They're going to be able to pull this off. But the second number I bring up is the number 42, which is 42 minutes and 11 seconds, which is how long Louisville had the ball for. Rutgers had it for 17 minutes. That's about a quarter for Rutgers' possession. But somehow, so when you look at Louisville basically, well, here's the difference. Rutgers looked at this almost like a Mike Tyson 1987 fight. It's going to be in 3 rounds, this is over. We're going to knock them out. Louisville looks at this more like Ali in the 60s. It's a long, long game, and they sustain drives in the third quarter. They score 14 points. Second, off a terrible Rutgers turnover that almost seemed to speak to the inexperience of Rutgers, which I think is impossible to say because obviously they've been in tough spots before recently, but it spoke to the immaturity of this team. Mike, at 14-3, are you comfortable, or did you see it the way I did and just kind of get that feeling that that score is very deceptive?
Well, unfortunately, and you have to take into account the whole body of work for Rutgers this year. Their offense has been generated on, and Coach Flood has said this numerous times, the ability to run the football and create one-on-one mismatches in the passing game. Now, as you pointed to, Rutgers with their big receiving core, and you heard Jesse Palmer on the broadcast saying he doesn't know if there's an NFL team that has 6'6", 6'4", 6'4", 6'6", as their 3 receiver set and tight end. And for very big receivers, Brandon Coleman, Mark Harrison, Timmy Ray, they were able to obviously exploit that in the passing game in the first half. I think one of the big things for Rutgers going into the second half was, and at 14-3, where you're a little overconfident, you're not overconfident, but you're relying on a defense that, and as you saw, Louisville didn't really rush the ball very well. I believe that one of the running backs had 15 carries for 25 yards, and that's because he broke a 15-yard run. So their ability to make a team one-dimensional, stop the run. The problem was in that game was Teddy Bridgewater, and Bridgewater making plays in the passing game. Rutgers really didn't get any sacks on him, and they weren't really able to get any type of pressure up front. You didn't see a lot of blitzing from Rutgers, which is very shocking because given Bridgewater's status, high ankle sprain earlier in the week, he broke his left wrist in the Connecticut game last Saturday, so he had his left arm heavily bandaged and cast was put on that arm, so he couldn't even grip a football. His handoffs were affected by it. He was taking snaps, shotgun. You saw a lot in Louisville on third down would bring in their backup quarterback just to run some bootleg action and to try to get a first down on third down. So at 14-3, I just think Rutgers, if they can at least control the clock a little bit more, and that time of possession status is very telling because I didn't realize it was that slanted. As you're going through a flow of a game, you realize Rutgers did score very quickly and not allow a lot of time. And the defense was on the field for a lot of that time and still should have made some more plays than they did because of the status of Teddy Bridgewater. I thought that was the most alarming thing to me in the game was Rutgers' inability to get pressure on Bridgewater given the health of his the health status that he was displaying and his arm being the way it was and the leg. His mobility was heavily affected. They did sack him 3 times, but I thought when you're picking a quarterback like that, you've got to be able to get more pressure than just 3 sacks.
Third down efficiency for Rutgers. Rutgers goes 3 for 11 to Louisville's 8 of 19. So the inability to sustain a drive, other than 2 just huge plays for Rutgers, just indicates that this was a team that was going obviously for the early knockout and wasn't ready, didn't seem ready to be able to sustain a lengthy drive. Other than the drop and of course the second drop for the interception, what gave any evidence to what were Rutgers' failings? They, from a running standpoint, 17 attempts for Rutgers for a total of 54 yards. Was Louisville's defense just structured or appeared that way to negate Rutgers' attempts to run, or was Rutgers, after that first big touchdown, of the belief that perhaps they could pass on this team and be able to have tremendous success? What forced Rutgers to change their philosophy in that game?
Well, and offensive coordinator Dave Brock came over from his days at Kansas State and Boston College, has been taking a lot of criticism from Rutgers fans lately, especially in the media, because of the fact that it seems as though Rutgers is not extremely balanced on offense. They're relying too much on the defense. A lot of, if they get in unmanageable situations because of a penalty on first down, they tend to run the ball the next 3 downs to change field position and play defense, which is a lot of what Shiano used to do under his regime. And so because of this, the Rutgers didn't exploit some of the mismatches that they had. I thought they were too pass happy and didn't really focus on the run. Their offensive line had a matchup against Louisville's D-line, which is a little bit undersized, that they could have exploited. Rutgers also, Savon Huggins, the backup running back, had 0 carries, which is alarming because 2 weeks prior, in Rutgers' biggest game to date at Cincinnati, he rushed for 41 yards, 179. He rushed for 41 carries for 179 yards. He was one of the big East Coast players of the week because of that rushing performance, and Rutgers ended up getting the win on that day when their offense really wasn't in sync passing-wise, with 2 interceptions that game, but they won the game 10-3 behind a solid running game and defense. You fast forward to Thursday night, Louisville did a good job of making Jawan Jameson not hit the hole as fast as he wanted to. Man, you got to remember something about Jameson, who's Rutgers leading back and has rushed for over 1,000 yards this year. He was hurt about 3 weeks ago in the Army game. And he faced Sparingly in the Cincinnati game, as well as in the Pittsburgh game last weekend. So his health and availability was very questioned throughout the week as to whether or not he was going to be able to make an impact on the game. Coach Schwartz said in the post-game press conference that he really wanted to get one of the backs going and then trickle in the other one, and it just never worked out, and Savon didn't really get a lot of touches. So what that did was, it goes back to the time of possession as well. When a team has the ball for so long, and Rutgers, like I said, they were all of a sudden you're up 14-3, and in that last minute of the third quarter, you're down 17-14 after a touchdown, a fumble on the ensuing kickoff, and then another touchdown the next play. I felt like Rutgers abandoned their game plan of, trying to set up the pass game with the run game. And they got away from that. They didn't use Huggins, who has been healthy these last couple of weeks and just had, like I said, a big game 2 weeks ago. I was very alarmed by that. But I thought, overall, Rutgers did play defensively a good game. When you look at, they only held the 3 points in the first half. That second touchdown was because of the fumble and the field position you gave Louisville's offense. So I thought the defense played well. I thought Noah actually played well, even with the last interception, which is just a misread. He thought his receiver was running an out and go, and he actually just ran the out pattern, and he kind of put some air under and was able to be intercepted. But I really thought that Gary Nova played well. There's signs here for the future that are positive. The defense playing well. I thought Rutgers just got away a little bit too early from the run game, and I think because of that, the time of possession battle that you had mentioned before, I think that was a big contributor into it. When you're lacking plays on the offensive side of the ball, you tend to tense up, and it goes into the play calling in terms of maybe we should pass a little bit more, try to get some more points on the board. Now, I'm going to preface that by saying I thought where Rutgers made a big mistake, and you see a lot of coaches do this in both pro and college, was they got the ball back with about 2 minutes left in the first half, up 14-3 with one timeout, and not only with one timeout, but you had the passing game that already had the 2 big passing plays to Coleman and Harrison. You get the ball in the second half, and I thought Rutgers had an opportunity there to take advantage of that, maybe get a score through a field goal, something to put a little more pressure on Louisville coming out of the halftime break. And especially in college, where the teams, the clock gets stopped, and when the teams are moved after the first down, Rutgers could have exploited that. And it speaks to the offensive coordinator full season, played a lot last year as a true freshman, he's a true sophomore, and I thought they didn't trust him enough to let him make plays in the passing game in that sequence that could have actually put some more pressure on Louisville, and maybe even put the game into a 21-3 situation by halftime. And then a lot of coaches tend to say, listen, we're leading, we get the ball in half, our defense is playing well, wide risk of turnover. I'm more of the opposite of the Belichick mentality. Let's put some points on the board because we get the ball in the second half.
Coming up, folks, on the Nick Zaveri Show with Mike Leon, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Is this the best college football year we've ever seen? And does this make a really good case for why the NFL has a lot of work to do with their postseason? Stick around. Mike, a couple of years ago, the great Beano Cook on I think it was John Kincaid, or was someone had a sports morning or a morning sports show. It might have been Dan Le Batard. And in 2006, shortly before the USC Notre Dame game, Cook had said that games like Notre Dame USC was why the NFL or why college football always would be a better sport or a more entertaining sport than the NFL. And of course, I almost got into a car accident because I thought it was so absurd to compare the two, because the NFL, I thought at the time, was so much better that I just had to pull off the side of the road, just laugh and gnash my teeth and just whine about an old guy who just seemed so delusional. And of course, sadly, Cook passed away this year, and our thoughts and prayers with his family, and rest in peace to a great, brilliant sports mind, and probably, essentially, maybe one of the sort of elder statesmen of college football talk in the United States. Mike, take the season apart. We start the year USC number 1, Alabama 2, LSU 3, Oklahoma 4, Oregon 5, Georgia 6 to start the season. We then switch gears. We take ourselves to end of the year now. So basically week 14 poll wise. Unranked at the start of the season, Notre Dame 12-0. Alabama number 2 at 11-1. Numbers 2 through 5 are all 11-1 actually. Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and Oregon respectively. And Kansas State coming out 6 at 10-1. How do you explain A, the meteoric rise of Notre Dame, and B, evaluate my claim that this might be the best season of college football, and before we actually start to switch to a playoff system or something resembling a playoff system in 2014?
Well, let me take your first point about Notre Dame. You have to remember something. Charlie Weiss really set this up for Notre Dame. He had numerous years of back-to-back top 25 recruiting classes. Don't forget, he recruited Manti Te'o, who's a linebacking prospect from Hawaii. So he recruited him to come to Notre Dame. He recruited Sierra Wood, who's their top running back. Brian Kellyson is only in his third year there, so his recruiting classes really haven't had a chance to take shape and form, except for, Everett Golson, who's the quarterback for them, the redshirt freshman. You have to look at some of the recruiting classes that Charlie Weiss stockpiled in terms of talent. And this is why coaching is so big in the college game, because you look at what Weiss did, and here he is with these recruits, and they're very talented and graded by a lot of the recruiting services out there as one of the tops in the country. Yet he produced mediocre seasons, and here's Kelly with that same talent, and he has them at 12-0. Now, before the year started, everyone said that Notre Dame was able to navigate their schedule and in any way find themselves 11-1, 12-0. At 11-1, they'd easily be in the BCS game. At 12-0, you would think that they'd be in the national championship. And these preseason rankings really hurt because it hurts the team when they're not ranked to try to make the jumps and leaps and bounds to get into that top 5, by season's end. You have to do a lot of winning in front of you, so give Notre Dame credit, winning at Oklahoma, being able to win at USC, beat BYU, they won at Michigan State. Before the year, a lot of tough teams on their schedule that you saw going in, Notre Dame was going to be underdogs in the games, and then they did win the game. So you give them credit to that. At terms of is this the best college football season, I don't know if I can go that far. There's been a lot of parity the last couple of years in terms of teams 1 through 10. And there's been a lot of arguments between teams 1 through 10 as to, hey, we have 1 loss, we should be playing. No, we have 1 loss, we should be playing. We did, Florida this year, they've beaten 4 ranked teams all on the road. But then you look at Florida's schedule and you realize, they needed a blocked punt to do Louisiana Lafayette at home. They say, and late in the season, too, not early in the season, late in the season. You look at a lot of these SEC teams, Arkansas earlier in the year was ranked preseason top 10. And here they are losing to Louisiana Monroe at home, and then they lost to Rutgers later on at home. So the preseason rankings have been talked about as to maybe we should move them to week 4, give teams a chance to actually get some games under the belt, let the humans with their eyeballs judge who is actually the top 25 teams in the country, and then go based off that. But I don't know if this is the best college football season. There's a reason why people at the FBS level, which is the football bowl subdivision level, where these big conferences are, like the SEC and the Pac-12, there's a reason why they have said the regular season in college football is a playoff. Look at today's game between Alabama and Georgia. It's a matchup of the number 2 and number 3 teams in the country, okay? So that is a playoff in itself because the winner goes on to play Notre Dame in the national championship. And to navigate a season undefeated, if you ask Oregon or Kansas State from this year, who both lost in games where they were favored in, it's very tough. It's difficult. Rutgers had an opportunity themselves at 7-0 coming home, and they were ranked 15th at that time. To navigate the schedule, and here they are. They play Penn State. They play Army. You would think they get a couple more wins under their belt. At Cincinnati, they were going to be favored in a lot of their games. Maybe even they had a chance to run undefeated, and as you see, they lost 3 out of their last 5, and they finished 9-3. So the college football season, to me, I was an advocate for a playoff for a long time, and now I'm starting to see why a playoff is not really essential in college football. +1 system might work out because, and that's what we're moving to 2014, where you have 1 plays 4, and then 2 plays 3, and then the winners meet. College football is very different. It's all about revenue, and it's all about the bowl system, because getting fans of like an Alabama and Notre Dame to travel to Miami to watch them play, and then the winner the following week, let's say, travel to California for the Rose Bowl, you're not going to get a lot of fans going to both sites. They're going to pick one or the other, because of travel expenses. We talked about earlier with the NFL and the economic situation that the country is facing. A lot of fans are not going to be able to budget both trips. And so because of that, there hasn't been a real way to formulate a football playoff. I know Division I AA, the lower division, the FCS level has it, but you got to remember these are smaller schools and they host it on site, and you got smaller fan bases and smaller stadiums. You're not expecting big TV deals, and you're not expecting a lot of eyeballs to watch, the football championship series, Villanova at Delaware, and sometimes they set up the travel so it's not incumbent upon the schools to spend a lot of money. I think college football is actually in a really good position right now with the way this regular season has turned out. But is it one of the best? In recent memory, it's very good, but I don't know if it's one of the best of all time.
Earlier news from this week from USC is defensive coordinator Monty Kiffin has recused himself or has left the team to pursue other opportunities. Mike, is Dad basically leaving before the execution or the firing, at least, of his son, after going? I know we talked about the preseason poll, but going from 1 in the country to currently being unranked on the BCS. Is this just Monty sort of averting his eyes from what's about to happen to his kid?
A lot of the talk in California has been, how can Lane Kiffin navigate such a dicey situation of firing his father? Because the defense has been one of the points of interest in this USC season that's kind of held them back. Now, before the season started, while USC was preseason number 1, a lot of people felt that USC was lacking the depth in case any injuries occurred on the defensive or offensive side of the ball. And it was one of the reasons that, especially, they had a tough schedule with playing Oregon. They played at Stanford. They played UCLA, who under Jim Moore has been very good. They had a lot of tough games for themselves to navigate. So they weren't really a rock solid number one, like a lot of other teams, like the Alabamas of the world and this and that have been in past years. I think the thing with the Kiffin situation is very intriguing. I mean, I don't think you can point to any other sports story in recent memory where a son is the head coach and the dad is actually, on his staff. I know the Schottenheimers, Marty and Brian have been in similar situations, but Marty was more of an advisor to the Jets, not really in any position-making authority where Brian could actually, let go of him. So, yeah, I don't really see it. Kiffin, Monty stressed this week that he's going to pursue some NFL opportunities. I don't know what NFL opportunities are out there. A lot of people in the media are like, where are these opportunities that he's talking about? But I think it is to save a little egg on the face so that way, his son doesn't have to go out there and actually, get dad the old pink slip. And it's unfortunate because I think Lane Kiffin has gotten numerous opportunities, whether it be as he must be an amazing interviewer because the feeling around him is very cocky because he came up in his dad's way of thinking in terms of I know more about football than you do, and now you see now with the University of Tennessee, with what he did with the Oakland Raiders, what he's done with USC and the talent that Carroll left behind. Kiffin has not really succeeded and he continues to get opportunities. It's very, very strange that he continues to get these chances. I would love to, get somebody's perspective from USC as to why he does, but he continues to, and wish Lonnie the best. And this is definitely clearly signs of he was let go before that, before he had to ask that.
Yeah, I've never, and I'm glad you brought up his track record. And Mike, I think you probably said it best to sum up the fascinating trail of Lane Kiffin, because when he got the job in Oakland, I didn't get it. I mean, as a successful offensive coordinator at USC, I kind of understood what Davis was thinking with a young coordinator, because the last time he had a young coordinator, of course, was John Gruden, and John Gruden basically helped put a Super Bowl team together. So I understood that. But then the Tennessee thing comes up, which seemed to be more or less reputation from Kiffin's role at USC. And then, of course, coming back to USC, which seemed to be the proverbial tail between his legs type of thing. I don't understand either, and I'm pretty convinced it's not necessarily interviewing skills, but it's blackmail. That the man must have something on a lot of college teams. And, of course, I'm being facetious, but I never quite understood Kiffin. I don't see anything that he's done in any place that warrants him to get get this many opportunities. That being said, there's talk about Charlie Strong out of Louisville possibly getting tagged to be the new coach at Tennessee, or possibly even Auburn, who recently let go of Gene Chizik, 2 years removed from Cam Newton and a BCS championship. Mike, moving from the nightmare that is USC, let's talk about SEC for a second. You mentioned it's going to be 2 versus 3, Alabama, Georgia, for the right to play Notre Dame in the national championship game. Predictions. What do you see happening? And this, by the way, folks who are listening, this game will have probably taken place by the time we post this, but we are about an hour away from kickoff time. It's 3:04 out of New York, so we're gonna wrap up soon so we can all get settled in to watch this. Mike, predictions for today's game. Does Nick Saban get to go back and play for another championship?
Well, I definitely think that Alabama has a really good chance to win this game. If you look at their running game with Eddie Lacy, quarterback A.J. McCarron, the championship experience that they've had now being in the SEC championship for the last couple of years. They weren't in the SEC championship last year, LSU was, but they did get to the national championship game, and they were in a situation where Florida is this year, where they were on the outside looking in, needed some losses late in the season, and then ended up moving up. And I think the edge that Alabama has is that they've played in big games and that big game experience. Georgia's quarterback Aaron Murray has not played particularly well in big games. Now Georgia is very talented defensively. With Jarvis Jones on the defensive line, they have a Tari Kimball who's back in the secondary, who's a very good defensive player. So they do have some players that are very high on a lot of people's draft boards. Georgia. And they did play very well in their biggest game of the year to date in terms of forcing turnovers on the University of Florida and beating them 17-9 at the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, as it's called, there in Jacksonville. But Georgia hasn't particularly played well in some of their other games. You know, they lost to South Carolina, a very big, by 3 touchdowns in Columbia. And so after everyone looks at that game and what South Carolina's defense was able to do to Georgia in that game, get pressure on Aaron Murray. Murray had a couple turnovers. Even in the Florida game, Aaron Murray had 3 interceptions. So I look for Georgia, the big game experience, the ability that they had to run for 5-6 yards per carry this year with Lacey. I think Alabama will win. I think it'll be a close game, but I think it'll be like a 24-17 variety. And I think Alabama will play Notre Dame. And that's really the matchup a lot of the TV networks want and a lot of the other people around the country want. The two programs with probably as much tradition as any other program, you know, in college football. And, you know, I want to go back to something you said earlier about Bino Cook. You know, Bino's right in this regard because, you know, sports writer Steve Ferlin for the Star Ledger said recently about this Rutgers-Louisville game this past Thursday. You know, he tried to explain college sports and the environment that it creates to one of his friends who didn't understand it. And he said, it's like being a fan of the New York Giants. You can always be a fan, but you can never be a New York Giant. There's only a few of us that are fortunate to ever put on a Giant uniform play, but when you have a diploma from Rutgers, it's more about your identity as a person, that you went to Rutgers and you can carry that with your alma mater. And that's a lot of college sports is based on traditions and rivalries and fan enthusiasm that's unparalleled in the NFL game, especially now with the NFL charging some of the outrageous amounts that they do for tickets. You're seeing the declining in attendance. You're seeing blackouts around the league that we talked about. I think college sports is on a little bit better footing, even though the NFL makes more money. I think college sports is a little bit on better footing in terms of, you know, does it gain national perspective and notoriety? I don't think so because of how big the NFL is come playoff time, and that the college football doesn't have that, and the bowls kind of take away a little bit of that. No one wants to watch some of these bowl matchups that are being displayed on ESPN unless you're a fan of the school. Whereas you could watch an NFL divisional playoff game, you know, like we all did with that same Seahawks game and how great that game was in the atmosphere. But I think college sports does have that on the NFL where the traditions, the rivalries, and the fan passion is there.
Comments from, of course, Facebook. We're still trying to grow the fan base for the show. Brent Dolan writes, Mike, and I'll direct this to you. Brent writes, why does everybody hate Notre Dame in light of this season?
Well, I think the real reason everybody hates Notre Dame is because of the arrogance. You know, I tried explaining Notre Dame recently not being in a conference to someone close to me, and they were like, wait, I don't get it. Isn't everybody in a conference? And I think this is the perception around Notre Dame, that arrogance of they're the only school to have their own sign into the BCS system. So if they finish in the top 12 and have a really big year at 11-1, 12-0, they automatically get a BCS invite and steal it from an actual conference. With the Big East, they kept their non-revenue generating sports in the Big East conference while they remained independent in football. They did the same thing now with the ACC. They keep their independence in football and only have to play 5 games a year against ACC schools, which they were going to do already because they had Pittsburgh and Boston College on their slate. And now they get to do that and keep their money because they still get to factor into the BCS mix. And anytime you go to a BCS bowl, as anybody knows in college sports, it means a lot of revenue to the school. But that revenue is divided by the conferences. But with Notre Dame, they're in a conference, so they can keep that revenue. So I think that's that perceived arrogance. You know, they have a 15-year television deal with NBC that exclusively does all their content on NBC and NBC Sports Network. So it's that perceived arrogance that is the reason why people actually do hate Notre Dame. And why they haven't been successful in the last 20 years, and a lot of people are very happy about that. This year now kind of wipes away that last 20 years.
I still feel the same way about the conference issue with Notre Dame, but I will counter by saying that with so many teams joining up with conferences, and basically joining up with a conference means you get a part of a television deal. For example, it's what the SEC has with CBS, what the Big Ten has with ABC/ESPN. Notre Dame essentially has that with NBC, but they're the only school that does it. When I factor in the schedule that they played this year, it's for that reason alone that I'm willing to acquiesce my might despise of that school for the reason that they truly deserved a 12-0 season, an absolute berth in the BCS championship game. But to counter the argument about money and why they choose to be independent, which is exclusively tied to the NBC deal, I counter with what the other schools are doing, which is to join super conferences and get in on television action too. Essentially, Notre Dame doesn't have to do it because they can get revenue from a network solely by being Notre Dame, whereas Rutgers, for example, will be able to get ABC dollars by joining the Big Ten conference. So I see the point where the haters come in on Notre Dame, but I have to counter now by saying that Notre Dame is simply doing what other schools are now doing through a conference. What do your respond to that?
Well, I think as we start to shift the landscape of college football, and athletic director Jack Swarbrick has said at Notre Dame recently that they will continue to monitor the landscape. Everybody knows 2 years ago Notre Dame, Rutgers, Nebraska were really looked at as that 12th option to make the Big 12, the Big 10 a 12-team conference, and they ultimately settled on Nebraska because of the Big Ten likes to look at the geographic situation. Nebraska is touching the state of Iowa, where Iowa is already one of the schools in the Big Ten conference. They like to keep that footprint of states actually touching each other, which is the reason why New Jersey and Maryland, where Rutgers and Maryland were added this year, because Pennsylvania is already covered with Penn State. Once this landscape, and everyone's talking about how we're moving towards college conferences of 16 teams, and everyone wants to know why 16 is such a magic number, why not 20? Well, with 20, you kind of got to do rivalries. 16 is good for scheduling. You have 8 teams in each division. It's kind of like there's really no way to put it. It's more about an even number of teams. And right now, the Big Ten is at 14, so they'll have 2 divisions of 17. I think Notre Dame is slowly going to realize that the deals that they were getting before with the Big East and the ACC are going to go by the wayside, because teams are going to finally force their hand and make them join a conference. The best fit for them would be the Big Ten because of their natural rivalries with Purdue and Indiana, who are located in the state of Indiana, just like Notre Dame. The rivalries that they've had with Michigan and Michigan State. They have played Ohio State recently. But Notre Dame likes to keep national. They say they recruit nationally. That's why they have USC and Stanford every year on the schedule. That's why they like to play one of the service academies. They like to keep themselves free to be able to play games like Miami at a neutral place, or a Big East school like a Syracuse or UConn up in Connecticut, because they know they have a national fan base, and they feel they won't move to that unless something forces their hand tactically in terms of the college football realignment landscape. So I think sooner or later it's going to happen, but who knows what's going to happen. If you had told me Rutgers would be in the Big Ten, within the next couple of years, just last year, 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have believed you. So who knows what's possible in terms of this conference realignment that's ongoing.
Mike, thanks so much, buddy. Folks, with that, we're going to actually start to wrap up the show. Mike, one last time, plug us on Twitter and final thoughts.
Yeah, on Twitter, at BAKIDLEON, at the Kid Leon on Twitter. You can reach out to me there. Final thought for this week, I'm looking forward to a lot of the Sunday NFL matchups. There's some good matchups around the league this past Sunday. Last Sunday's games provided some good insight into the shape of the playoff season starting to take place. But you've got some very intriguing matchups on Sunday. Obviously, everyone's going to be looking at the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game for this Sunday and what the status of Roethlisberger has already ruled himself out. Then you've got some secondary and tertiary games that are going to be really interesting to watch. Minnesota-Green Bay is one of them I'm going to be, kind of tuned into, because Minnesota's fighting for a wild card spot. Green Bay just losing, absolutely getting destroyed, at the Giants. The Monday night game, I think, is arguably the best game of the week with, Robert Griffin III and what Washington's done out of the bye winning their last 2 against the Giants, who everyone, pretty much wrote off for dead. And here they are, beating the Green Bay Packers at home soundly. And now they're moving, to try to get a stranglehold on this division. Obviously down here in the Miami area, people will be tuned into the New England-Miami game to see if New England can continue their dominance over Miami, or, Ryan Tannehill can maybe get an outside shot at this final playoff spot, especially given the way Pittsburgh has been playing. Like I mentioned earlier, Cincinnati and San Diego, another intriguing matchup to see if the Bengals keep rolling. And then the Broncos. And unfortunately for us, Nick, the Broncos can almost wrap up a guaranteed playoff spot with a Charger loss, and they win on Sunday because the Chargers would have 8 losses, and the Broncos would have 9 wins, so no way for them to get to 9-7.
Mike, thanks, folks. You probably saw me goof up the music playoff for Mike, so we obviously screwed it up. So we are gonna end the show, of course, courtesy of CeeLo Green one last time with Bright Lights Bigger City. And that is going to be the end of the show. Folks, thank you for sticking around. YouTube.com/NPZ1978. Mike and I are going to be back next week talking NFL, Raiders, and all things sports. You can, of course, find the show again on YouTube. And for those who are friends of us, either on Facebook, please leave a comment for us when we post the show. Because, like our friend Brent Dolan, we will read it on the air. Thanks again, guys. And, of course, we will talk to you next week.
Familiar feeling that Friday's from a spot. Yeah, I'm looking for some action, and it's out there somewhere. You can feel the electricity.